The personal channel lit up at 3:47 station time. The face that filled the screen belonged to Speaker VTH, the same Uri elder who had read Earth's sentence into the Compact's permanent record 3 years ago. He looked at me, at the human on the other end of a channel he had never expected to open, and for a long moment he said nothing. "You planned this," he said finally. "We prepared," I said. "There is a difference." He was very old from a civilization that had been old when humans were still figuring out fire, and I watched him process the arithmetic. 3 years of apparent acceptance, 3 years of secondary postings and procedural compliance, 3 years of sitting in rooms where no one looked at us twice because we had already been dealt with. "Your proposed framework will require significant structural changes," he said. "Yes," I said. "That is why we included an 18-month implementation timeline." Another pause, longer. "There will be considerable resistance from dominant member species." My voice did not change. There would have been considerably more if we had not demonstrated that the current structure has vulnerabilities they were unaware of. The resistance will be more manageable now. The screen flickered. Outside the viewport behind me, a planet rotated somewhere in the deep dark, indifferent to the conversation happening in the small lit room of a ship that was officially just exploring. A ship called the Meridian. A ship that, according to every filing we had submitted, was on a long-range survey mission. "I will recommend review," VTH said. It was not agreement. It was something smaller than agreement and something larger than dismissal. It was the beginning of a conversation on terms we had chosen. The part that still keeps me up at night, that comes later. Stay with me. 3 years earlier, the pen was still warm when Ambassador Sorin lifted it from the page. I watched his hand. I watched the signature dry. I watched 300 alien species shift in their seats, not with discomfort, but with the easy restlessness of beings who had already moved on to their next thought. We were not even worth the full weight of their attention. The KE delegation in the front row was already talking quietly among themselves, low clicks and hums, the sound of people wrapping up a meeting that had gone exactly as expected. Nobody was surprised. That was the part that stayed with me long after the hall emptied. My name is Yale Dro. I was 34 years old and 6 years into my posting as Earth's senior diplomatic attaché when I stood in that gallery and watched my species handed a sentence in front of the galaxy. The Galactic Compact does not thunder. It does not raise its voice. It simply moves the way weather moves, indifferent to whatever happens to be standing in its path. 217 member species, 3 centuries of accumulated procedure, a sense of its own permanence so deep it had become invisible even to the people inside it. We had been invited to Vara 9 to answer for an incident near the KE border. One of our patrol ships, the kind we were permitted to operate under provisional member status, had discharged its navigational pulse array too close to a KE monitoring station. Our crew had reported a sensor malfunction. The KE had called it a deliberate provocation. The Compact had scheduled a hearing within 2 weeks, which I had learned meant they had already made their decision. I had prepared 40 pages of technical documentation, trajectory data, sensor logs, crew statements, a complete breakdown of the navigational systems involved, reviewed by 3 independent engineers. I had spent 11 days building the clearest possible case that our ship had simply made an error, a real error, the kind that happens when young crews operate in unfamiliar space. Speaker VTH accepted the documentation. He placed it in a folder. He set it on the table without opening it. That was when I understood how the day would end. Ambassador Sorin was a careful man. Careful the way a person gets when they have spent 20 years being told to be careful. When caution has become so deep, it is no longer a choice but a reflex. He had called me that morning before the session and said the words I had been dreading. "We have to be realistic about our position." I had told him our position was defensible. He had looked at me with something I can only call tired patience. "Yale, our position is that we are 30 years into contact with a civilization that has been operating for 300. Our position is that we have no allies in that chamber and no leverage outside it. Our position is that if we push back and lose, and we will lose, the terms will be worse. He was not wrong. That was the cruelest part. He was not wrong at all. The KE Dominion demanded three things. First, a formal admission of deliberate provocation, to be entered into the compact's permanent record. Second, territorial concession of the outer H-Versen belt, a rich field of mineral deposits that Earth's mining operations had been developing for 8 years. Third, Earth's demotion from provisional member to observer species. Observed species. The phrase had a long history in compact archives. It was what they called a civilization that needed watching, a species that had made the mistake of being somewhere inconvenient, without being powerful enough to make inconvenience cost anything. Speaker VTH read the terms aloud in a voice that carried no particular feeling. The chamber listened. There were small sounds, the rustle of movement, a low murmur in one corner where a cluster of Fenari delegates were exchanging comments I could not hear. No objections, no questions. No species stood to say the terms seemed excessive or that the evidence had not been properly reviewed. Why would they? We were not their problem, we were not their ally, we were not their threat. Soren signed the documents in 2 places and pressed his palm to the authentication panel. Counsel Dreth, the KE lead negotiator, long-limbed, efficient, collected the pages with the brisk economy of someone completing a routine transaction. There was a brief exchange of formal words. The session was closed. The overhead lights shifted back to their neutral setting. I stayed in the gallery while the chamber emptied. A junior member of the KE delegation passed below me near the exit corridor. He said something to the aide beside him that I did not fully catch, but I caught the tone of a person making a small joke, something dry and dismissive. The aide responded with a short sound that might have been a laugh, or the KE equivalent of one. They were not thinking about us. They were thinking about dinner or their next meeting or nothing at all. We had been dealt with. We could be set aside. I sat there for a long time, after the lights dimmed to standby. I am not a person given to large feelings in public. My mother raised me in a city that ran on efficiency, and my training had refined that quality until it was almost mechanical. I did not feel the need to cry or shout or put my fist through something. What I felt was quieter and in some ways worse. The feeling of a scale settling, a weight being placed on one side and nothing on the other, and the understanding that the only solution was to find something heavy enough to change what the scale said. I took out my personal device and made a note, not a message, not a report, just a note for myself, 3 sentences long. They believe this is over. They believe we will accept this because we have no choice. They are right about the first part. I closed the device and walked out of the gallery. The station's corridors were the usual controlled bustle of a diplomatic hub, species moving in every direction, the low hum of environmental systems, the neutral lighting designed to be acceptable to as many biological types as possible. Nobody looked at me. Nobody had any reason to. I passed a group of Uri staffers laughing at something on a shared screen. I passed a K-Thadish walking with the easy confidence of a person who expects the path to clear for them. I passed a pair of human staffers from our own delegation, young, subdued, carrying document cases, and not quite meeting each other's eyes. I found an empty observation alcove near the outer ring and stood at the viewport for a while. The stars outside were the same stars they always were, ancient, indifferent, vast. They had watched civilizations rise and collapse and rise again across spans of time that made our 30 years of contact look like an afternoon. I thought about what the galaxy believed about us. It believed we were small. It believed we were new. It believed that our eagerness to participate, our careful diplomacy, our patience through years of provisional status meant that we were the kind of species that would keep being patient indefinitely because we had learned our place. It believed that today's session was a lesson we would absorb and carry forward, that it had taught us something important about how the galaxy worked and where we fit inside it. It had taught us something, I will give it that, but not what it thought. I stood at that viewport until the station's public announcement system chimed the hour. Then I straightened my jacket, picked up my case, and walked back toward the docking ring where Earth's transport was waiting. I had a long flight home. I had a great deal to think about, and somewhere below the surface of what I was thinking, in a place I had not yet named, something had changed in the way I understood the next 3 years of my life. The galaxy had made a calculation. It had looked at us and decided what we were. It had written the number down and moved on. It had not considered the possibility that we might have a different opinion about the math. 3 years is not a long time. Ask anyone who has spent 3 years waiting for something important, and they will tell you it passes with a particular kind of stubborn slowness, each week indistinguishable from the last. But ask an engineer with a deadline or a navigator with a destination already locked in, and they will tell you something different. 3 years properly used is an extraordinary amount of time. I did not know what I was being called back for when the message arrived. It came through official channels. My reassignment orders signed by 3 different offices in a sequence that told me someone had been very careful about the paper trail. I had been posted to a secondary diplomatic station near the outer ring. Routine work, mostly procedural, the kind of assignment given to people who have been quietly sidelined. The message did not explain the new posting. It gave me a location, a date, and a clearance code I had never seen before. I reported to Geneva on a gray morning in early spring. The building I was directed to was not the diplomatic office I expected. It was 4 floors underground, reached by an elevator that required 3 separate identity confirmations and a retinal scan that made my eyes water. The woman waiting for me at the bottom was Admiral Grace Cass. I say that name now because she deserves to be remembered exactly as she was. The most deliberately calm person I have ever met in my life. She was perhaps 60, with the compact efficiency of someone who had never wasted a movement in her career. Her office was almost empty. A desk, 2 chairs, a screen on the wall, and a single sheet of paper centered perfectly on the desk surface. I noticed she did not offer me tea or coffee, or any of the small gestures that people use to fill the space before a difficult conversation. She simply waited until I sat down. Then she began. "You were at Vara 9. Yes. You were in the gallery when Ambassador Soren signed the documents. Yes. What did you think about afterward?" I looked at her for a moment. She was not asking the question the way most people asked questions. She was not making conversation. She wanted the actual answer. "I thought about what the KE delegate said as he left," I told her. "I did not hear the words. I heard the tone. I thought about what it meant to be in a room full of people who are not afraid of you. I thought about the difference between being small and being assumed to be permanently small." She nodded once, the way you nod when someone confirms something you already knew. "Which conclusion," she said, "do you think was the mistake?" "The second one," I said, "and that mistakes have consequences." She picked up the sheet of paper from her desk and slid it across to me. It was not a document in any normal sense. A single handwritten paragraph, no official header, no signature. I read it twice. "This is not a military program," she said while I was reading. "Officially, it does not exist. What we have been doing for the past 2 years, and what you will now be part of, is a preparedness initiative. The name is deliberately boring. Boring names do not get written about." I set the paper down. "How long has this been running?" "Since 8 weeks after Vara 9. The order came from a level above mine, which means it came from people who watched that session and drew the same conclusion you did, much faster and with more resources." She folded her hands on the desk. "We did not announce it. We did not hold a press event. We did not make speeches. We started working." The pen left indents on the page, 3 pages deep. What they had built over the previous 2 years was something I struggled to fully grasp in that first conversation, because it did not look like what I had expected. I had expected anger translated into hardware, the blunt machinery of a civilization that had been pushed and decided to push back. That was not what it was. It was a library, the most dangerous library ever assembled. They had obtained, through legitimate trade licenses and cultural exchange agreements, access to the Compact's navigational and communication systems. The licenses permitted observation and limited use. What the licenses had not anticipated was that human engineers would spend 18 months taking those systems apart at the theoretical level, mapping every protocol, every frequency band, every routing structure, not to copy them, to understand them completely, to know them better than the species that had built them. "We are not stealing anything," Admiral Cass said. "Everything we accessed was legally available to us. We simply paid closer attention than anyone expected." Alongside that, there was a construction program in the outer system. I had heard vague rumors about expanded survey operations near the heliopause, the kind of background noise that gets generated when large projects are carefully disguised as smaller ones. What was actually being built there were vessels, not warships, not by any definition the compact's treaty language recognized. Because our people had read that treaty language with a precision that bordered on obsessive. "We found a gap," she said, and for the first time, something moved behind her eyes that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. "The treaty defines a warship as a vessel whose primary design function is the delivery of offensive force against another vessel or installation. Our ships are not designed for that. Their primary design function is rapid transit and environmental resilience." She paused, let it land. "The fact that they are also extremely fast and carry extensive shielding and communication disruption systems is technically incidental to their primary purpose." I stared at her. "That is an extraordinary reading of the treaty." "It is the correct reading," she said. "We had 47 legal scholars spend 6 months confirming it." The third element was the one I had least expected. For 2 years, quietly, through channels that looked like academic exchanges and trade consultations and cultural outreach programs, Earth had been talking to 6 other species. Small species. Species that, like us, occupied the lower tiers of the compact's attention. Species that had their own versions of Vara 9, their own documents signed under pressure, their own memories of rooms where no one had stood up for them. The Pelhari, a cautious, methodical people from a double star system 3 sectors away. They had been filing territorial claims for 40 years. They had never once seen a ruling that went in their favor. The Vin, 80 years in the compact, 80 years of watching their claims dismissed, their grievances tabled, their representatives seated at the back of every chamber. The Surath, the Quinn, the Minor, the Idri, each with their own particular shape of grievance. Each having decided independently and long ago that the compact was not the fair and impartial body it claimed to be, and each having no idea what to do with that conclusion. Until we came along. "We did not tell them what to do," Admiral Cass said. "We shared information. We explained what we had found in the treaty language. We listened to their situations. We asked questions." She paused. What they decided to do with that information was entirely their own choice. "And what did they decide?" She slid a second document across the desk. This one was sealed. "You will find out in 3 months," she said. "This is your mission brief. You are being assigned to the ECV Meridian as Senior Diplomatic and Intelligence Officer. Your captain is a man named Oliver Finn. He is very good and he will not explain himself twice. So listen the first time." I picked up the sealed brief. It was heavier than it looked. "Admiral," I said, "what exactly are we trying to accomplish?" She looked at me for a long moment. "We are trying to accomplish a situation in which the galaxy realizes it made an error in its assessment of us," she said. "Not through force, not through a confrontation that we would certainly lose. We are going to use the compact's own structure against it, through perfectly legal means, executed simultaneously at a moment of our choosing, in a way that they cannot respond to fast enough to stop." She paused. "And then we are going to offer them better terms than they deserve. Because we are not interested in revenge. We are interested in a galaxy that will not do this to us again, or to anyone else who cannot afford to stop it." I looked at the sealed brief in my hands. "The gap between how powerful the galaxy thinks we are," I said slowly, "and how prepared we actually are. That gap," she said, "is the entire operation." I left the building 2 hours later and walked out into the gray Geneva spring, briefcase in one hand, A completely different understanding of the past 3 years in the other. I thought about all the small things I had noticed and not connected. The quiet budget reallocations, the sudden surge in deep space survey permits, the number of legal scholars who had been quietly brought into government service, the series of cultural exchange programs with species I had not previously known we were in contact with. It had not been invisible. It had simply not been what it looked like. Somewhere in the outer dark, a fleet was waiting. Somewhere in 6 other star systems, 6 other species were sitting with information they had been given and conclusions they had drawn themselves. Somewhere in a sealed container on a secure server, a data packet was complete and waiting for a release date. I found a bench near a canal and sat down. I watched the water for a while. A family of ducks crossed from one bank to the other with the unhurried confidence of creatures who had decided the canal belonged to them. I thought about Admiral Cass's phrase, "a moment of our choosing." 3 years ago, in a gallery above a diplomatic chamber, I had watched my species be handed a verdict by people who believed that the matter was settled. They had believed it because we had nothing. No allies, no fleet, no leverage. They were still looking at the same picture. They had not noticed that the picture had changed. I opened the sealed brief on the bench by the canal, read it through twice, and then sat for a long time watching the ducks. 3 months. We had 3 months. The water moved. The ducks moved. The city carried on around me, indifferent and ordinary. And under the surface of everything, very quietly, something massive was in motion. The ECV Meridian was not what I pictured. A long-range exploration vessel, according to every official designation. Smooth-hulled, sensor-rich, built for endurance. The kind of ship nobody looked at twice. Captain Oliver Finn met me at the airlock. A quiet man, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had decided most things didn't require a spoken response. The operation brief says 12 hours from now, we will be in position, I said. 11 hours and 40 minutes, he said. We have been in position for 3 weeks, moving slowly, staying within our survey corridor. My quarters were small and clean, a viewport showing deep space, the absolute dark between stars. I read the mission brief again, all of it. Then I lay on the bunk and looked at the ceiling. We had planned, we had checked. There was nothing left to add. I thought about what we actually were, not what we hoped to be, what we demonstrably were as a species. Stubborn not in the heroic sense, in the practical sense. The way a material refuses to shear under stress. Every time something tried to reduce us, we absorbed it and continued. We read things carefully. Every document the Compact had ever published. 3 centuries of arbitration decisions. We noticed patterns the Compact's own members hadn't mapped. You do not study the rules of a game you are winning. And we formed attachments to the small species who spoke to us in careful language about problems they could not solve. We spent 3 years building a coalition of the disregarded, not by promising power, by offering information and listening in return. A knock at my door. Peter Cole, young signals officer. 26, startled expression, device turning in his hands. He checked the relay protocols. They were correct. He stayed in the doorway. "Commander, are you scared?" "No," I said. Then, because it was the middle of the night and 11 hours was close enough to honesty, "What I am is worried about what it means that we had to do this." He thought about that. "You mean building all this in secret?" "Yes." He nodded, "But we are doing it. We are doing it." He said good night and left. At 3:50, I gave up on sleep and went to the bridge. Captain Finn stood at the observation panel, cup of something warm, watching the darkness. 0 hour in 7 hours and 40 minutes, he said. I know. We stood without speaking. Somewhere behind us, Earth was continuing its ordinary morning. Somewhere ahead, the Compact's core systems were going about business with no expectation that anything would be different. "Captain, what was your reaction when you were brought into this?" He considered. "I thought it was extremely ambitious. And now," he set down his cup, "now I think it was correctly scoped. We understood that the Compact's structure was its vulnerability. It never considered that someone might read the logic carefully enough to use it differently. At exactly 0 Compact standard, The bridge came to life, not dramatically, with the specific efficiency of people who had been waiting to do exactly this. 11 minutes in, I noticed the silence. Not nothing happening. A system trying to process too many things at once and discovering it had no procedure for this configuration. The compact's internal network was producing something I had never seen. Hesitation. The Pelhari withdrew first. The message cited 3 provisions of the compact's foundational charter, provisions that had never been meaningfully tested. The Pelhari had spent 40 years documenting their case. The document was 11,000 pages long. Pelhari withdrawal confirmed, Cole said. 40 seconds later, Vin withdrawal confirmed. Then the Surath, the Quinn, the Minor, the Idri, each filing within 90 seconds, each with their own document, their own 40 or 60 or 80 years of grievances. 6 withdrawals confirmed. Compact forum showing 47 new message threads. Route me the KE diplomatic frequency. The KE frequency was busy, not panicked, moving with the tempo of people who had just received a situation they did not anticipate. I closed the channel. The data packet released at the same moment as the 6th withdrawal. It went to every independent news service, academic network, and civil society archive that would accept an Earth-flagged transmission. The packet contained 11 years of arbitration decisions, 76 cases where outcomes were provably inconsistent with the compact's charter, 18 cases where KE-aligned species served on panels in violation of conflict provisions. We had not written editorial commentary. We had presented documents, cited sources, let the record speak. Packet distribution at 62% and climbing, said Diana Ash. The compact is trying to contact us, Cole said. Which channel? The formal diplomatic frequency. I waited 7 minutes. I wanted them reaching out, not issuing a demand. When I connected, the voice was not who I expected. The compact's administrative director, Fenari, exquisitely procedural, calm and careful and furious underneath. Commander Dro, we are requesting an explanation. Administrator Parath, 6 member species have exercised their charter right to withdraw. Earth has submitted revocation of agreements signed under duress, citing Provision 44, page 712. These actions are legal and properly filed. Commander, this is coordinated. Yes, the compact does not recognize the legal basis. The compact's own charter does. We have provided citations. Another pause. Your fleet positions are being interpreted as aggressive. Our vessels are registered exploration ships operating within designated survey corridors. Commander, what does Earth want? I had waited 3 years for that question. Please stand by. I will transmit our proposed framework. 47 pages, 18 months of work, mandatory independent panels, conflict provisions with enforcement, equal standing for all member species regardless of scale, a better system than the one they had, built to be better on purpose. The compact will need time to review this. Of course, we are patient. The compact tried to convene an emergency session, Cole said. They needed 72 member votes. 4 withdrawing species held seats. Vacant seats mean no quorum. KE fleet movement, Captain Finn said. 3 ships moving toward Transit Corridor 7, Henry Dar reported. 2 KE trading partners filed trade review notices. KE shipping along the main corridor is slowing. The KE had discovered that 3 of the 4 things they wanted to do required resources that were currently complicated, not stopped, slowed. Slowed was all we needed. At 6:33, the channel I had been watching most carefully lit up. The personal channel, reserved for senior representatives. Speaker VTH. He appeared on screen, old, composed still. He looked at me for a long moment. You planned this. We prepared. There is a difference. How long? Since 8 weeks after Vara 9. Silence. He processed the arithmetic. 3 years of apparent acceptance. Secondary postings, procedural compliance, building this the entire time. What do you want? We want what our document says. A compact that functions the way it claims to function, arbitration that is independent, protections that cannot be overridden. I paused. Speaker VTH, do you remember Vara 9? Our documentation was 40 pages. It was set on the table without being opened. He was quiet. We are not asking you to undo that. We are asking you to build a system where it cannot happen again. Your framework will require significant structural changes. Yes, that is why we included an 18-month timeline. There will be considerable resistance from dominant species. There would have been considerably more if we had not demonstrated that the current structure has vulnerabilities they were unaware of. The resistance will be more manageable now. Another long pause. I will recommend review. It was not agreement. It was the beginning of a conversation on terms we had chosen. Thank you, Speaker. The screen went dark. All 6 allied species holding positions. KE mobilization stalled. Data packet at 91%. Captain Finn stood beside my station. Dawn, he said. The ship's clock said 6:41. Somewhere on a planet I could not see, it was morning. Yes, dawn. 18 months. That is how long it took. Not an ending. 18 months of the hardest diplomatic work I have ever done. I am sitting now in a chamber that did not exist 2 years ago. Smaller than the Vara 9 hall. Better lighting. Seating that does not rank species by diplomatic tier. The longest argument which we did not concede. I am here as an observer. The new framework has been in operation for 3 months. Today's case involves a boundary dispute between 2 species I have never met. The panel has 5 members from 5 species, none with a recorded interest in the outcome, all selected through a documented, auditable process. Nobody sets documentation on the table without opening it. I step outside and walk to a viewport I have come to know. The KE Dominion has shrunk. 2 member systems negotiated separate agreements with Earth and 3 of the Meridian Group species. The KE's internal politics are complicated. The cause of their complications is a documented public record of their arbitration conduct. We did not write that record. They did. We simply made sure people could read it. The Vin legal scholar in Parve is on the new framework's founding council. He called me 3 months after the operation. For the first time in his career, he had received a preliminary ruling within 40 days and an acknowledgement that his claim would receive full review. He said it in a very quiet voice, the voice of someone who has waited a long time and is not yet sure they are allowed to believe. I told him he was allowed. Admiral Cass retired. She sent me 3 sentences. The initiative concluded satisfactorily. You were an excellent officer. Take some leave. I have not taken leave yet. I will. A species that was never contacted sent us a message last month, discovered by a compact survey vessel, assigned observer status, trying to understand what provisional membership would mean. Their message was careful and formal. Behind it, the anxiety of people new to something enormous, trying to understand whether anyone will treat them fairly. I wrote back. I told them what I knew. The Pelhari's 40 years of claims, the treaty language where the protections were and where the gaps were, the Meridian Group and how it had come together. And I told them something I have been thinking about since that night on the Meridian. The galaxy is not a fair place. It is large and old. It has accumulated habits that are very difficult to change. Habits of assuming small species are permanently small, that new species are permanently new. That species without allies will accept whatever terms they are given. This is the assumption worth proving wrong, not through force, through reading every document with a precision they do not expect, through building relationships with species who share your situation, through understanding the system well enough to know where it is fragile, through waiting for the moment of your choosing, through being exactly as difficult as the situation requires, for exactly as long as it takes. I received a reply 4 days later, short and formal, and in the middle of the formal language, a sentence I have thought about every day since. We were told the galaxy is too large and too established for a new species to change anything meaningful. We wanted to ask if that is true. I wrote back 1 sentence. Ask the KE. I closed the message and looked out the viewport. The stars were the same stars they always are, ancient, vast, indifferent. We have been here 33 years. We have made a start. I thought about that morning in Geneva. The bench by the canal. The family of ducks crossing the water with unhurried confidence. Peter Cole turning his device in his hands. Ambassador Soren's hand on the pen. The sound of the KE-8 in the corridor. A sound I carried for 3 years and let mean something. The galaxy had decided what we were. It had made its calculation and moved on. 300 species sat in a room and watched us be handed a verdict. Not one stood up. We stood up. We just waited until we were ready. Here is what I know now. The galaxy is a negotiation. Every structure, every treaty, every arbitration panel, a negotiation won by someone in the past, and can be renegotiated by someone in the present who is willing to do the work. We were willing to do the work. We are going to keep being willing. That is not a threat. Threats belong to a different kind of story. This is the story of what happens when you are told the matter is settled, and you look at the settlement, and you read it very carefully, and you find the 47 legal scholars, and you take the 3 years, and you choose your mourning. I closed the device and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The screen flickered once, the old crack catching the station's ambient light, and then went dark. I did not turn it back on. I did not need to. The notes were in my head now, every single one of them, worn smooth as river stones. This is what we are. This is what we have always been. We just needed enough stars around us for the galaxy to finally notice.